Okay, so thank you very much. Welcome everyone. My name is Gabriella Vámos and I'm a PhD student at Eötvös Loránd University, Budapest. My main research topic is the workers' folklore during the early communist years in Hungary. And in my thesis, I examine how the workers' folklore was invented and presented to the publicity. I'm mostly interested about public holidays and how these events were uniformed. Now, in my paper, I'm trying to understand the relationship between culture and politics during the early period of socialism in Hungary called Rákosist era. After that, I will focus on how the new communist form of the culture Yes, so after that, I will focus on how the new communist form appeared in the folklorist methods, which topics were highlighted, and I will concentrate on the collection of the Workers' Folklore Research Group. I will agree that in this period, as the homogeneous workers' class was a construction by the political era, the folklore of them was also. As other East European states, Hungary became part of the Soviet sphere of influence after the Second World War. By 1948 and 49, it became evident that in addition to political transformations, radical social changes must be expected. The program and propaganda of the state building originated in a Soviet model. In 1948, when a Hungarian Workers' Party monopolized the power under the leadership of Mátyás Rákosi, the rivalry for the political hegemony finally ended. But different areas of the public sphere had already been Sovietized since 1945. Publication, import, and distribution of literary products, the theme of theatrical performances, operation of cinemas, the use of radio stations, political services, etc. Therefore, in addition to the scientific and economic life, the cultural sphere and its aims changed radically too. All segments of culture served as channels for the central ideological doctrines as tools to enhance the legitimacy of the new Soviet-style state system. The Hungarian-Soviet Cultural Association, which was founded in 1945, participated in the changes, so lectures, concerts, film clubs were organized, books and periodicals were published, Russian language courses were started, the most important works of Lenin and Stalin were translated. Although there had been left-wing politicians within the leadership of the Hungarian-Soviet Cultural Association from the beginning, their position was strengthened by the summer of 1946. And 1 year later, it became a Soviet propaganda organization. In Hungary, the widespread promotion of Soviet culture started from 1947 49. Soviet advisors visited the Hungarian scientific and art institutions, so culture gradually became a transmission channel to promote the central ideology. The key word was cultural revolution, which was related to popular education. It meant that a new attitude towards culture were developed for all members of society. The political era considered the socialist transformation of the villages as one of the bases of the cultural change, and in they pointed out that every step had taken to create a culture which is national in its form and socialist in its content. Naturally, all tools of education and communication were used to spread the new socialist culture. The culture, national in its form and socialist in its content, was spread by the press, radio, school materials, all areas of art, then by the creation of a new planned ceremonial structure and organizing model ceremonies. The social bases of the new culture were the workers, the working peasantry, and the intellectuals loyal to the party. Although at the policy level the society was presented as homogeneous, in fact huge turns took after the Second World War. The rapid land distribution, followed by forced collectivization, the industrialization, the persecution of created enemies of the society, etc., resulted unprecedented changes. As we can see this quote, we summarize the situation. So, it was much easier to reconstruct something based on the ethic than to ask about the recent situation. They showed it from afar. We have already delivered everything. We tried in vain to tell them that we didn't want the requisition, we only wanted to look at some things. So it was impossible to get a sense of the lives of the families. The ethnographic reconstruction was based on the things throughout in a yard. The transformations under political pressures didn't leave the scientific life unsketched, and Hungarian ethnography changed after Second World War. In 1949, Gyula Ortutai, as head of the Hungarian Ethnographical Society, was enraged with the announcement of the ideological political change, and he presented the program which marked the new path for ethnography. The 5-year plan of ethnography was prepared, which focused on the collection instead of the theoretical work and systematization. The objective of ethnography was to document the changes affecting the population of the villages and cities. It was to be completed in a framework of 10 newly organized research groups and 9 work teams. Besides the personal losses and the changing social, economic, and cultural characteristics, the discipline had to struggle to find its place in a new scientific life which increasingly followed the socialist model. As a result of the transformations, the themes, subjects, the examined areas, and areas of the folkloristic research changed. The focus of the research was no longer on a peasantry, and the ethnographers got interested in new social groups, so they urged the examination of the folklore of the industrial workers and the urban population. Thus, the research focused on the socialist reorganization of the agriculture, the life of the peasants, which changed rapidly because of the industrialization, the urban ethnography, and the closely related workers' lifestyle and workers' folklore. The research topics had to meet political expectations, so the emphasis was put on the presentation of the rural class struggle, the socialist village, the agrarian proletariat, the self-conscious workers, and the groups working in the agricultural cooperatives. The members of the generation of ethnographers who conducted fieldwork in 1950s could witness the real social manifestation of the false image suggested by the propaganda. On one hand, at the ideological level, there were present peasants who played music, sang, and danced, enjoyed the blessings of the Cultural Revolution, happily experienced the elimination of the difference between villages and cities, the atmosphere of the village freed from the kulaks and enemies, and the advantages of the collectivization. On the other hand, they saw the perplexity of the smallholders, the compulsory delivery, the requisition, the deprivation, the groups of people who moved to the cities to find work. After the shift in Hungarian folklore from 1950s, the culture of urban workers was considered a priority research topic, and the methodology of the Soviet workers and urban researches was used as a starting point. In this period, the folklore department of Eötvös Loránd University, Budapest, played an important role. Its head of department, Gyula Ortutai, supported the collections as Minister of Education from 1949 and later as the head of the newly formed Workers' Folklore Research Group. In the early 1950s, the members of the research group collected ethnographic and folkloristic materials in several settlements of the country, which are considered as the most valuable sources today. The preserved collections reveal not only the contemporary collection concepts, but also the way how discipline tried to collect in line with political expectations and to use and utilize its existing methodological characteristics. The members of the research group knew that the exploration of the workers' folklore was not an easy task, since it was not a homogeneous social layer. There were multi generation workers' dynasties, and as a result of socialist industrialization, a new group of workers recreated mainly from the peasantry, workers of the factories of the cities, workers in mines, etc. However, in line with the expectations, they tried to note and observe every narrative, tradition, custom, and festive occasion among the workers, which could later bear hide as workers' folklore. As the socialist political discourse used a definition for worker which was evident and suggested homogeneity. During the collections in 1950s, the folklorists didn't need an explanation about who could be considered as worker, whose folklore should be collected. Everyone's who were considered workers by the political leadership. That's why the customs and beliefs of the Hungarian miners, the life stories, songs, tales of the workers in Stalin's city, which was built as socialist dream town, the songs, poems, workers' marches, the varied under the influence of the press. A new genre such as rhythms and chastushkas, some specialties of as the workers' Our Father, Ten Commandments, fell into the same category. Consequently, the collected material became as heterogeneous as the socialist working class itself. In 1953, a member of the Workers' Folklore Research Group, Linda Dick, presented and edited a collection guidance for researchers and volunteer collectors to help the collection of workers' traditions in the following years. It is worth talking briefly about the Gaudians. Its analysis is enlightening not only because of its topic, but also it informs us about the requirements that socialist ethnography had to meet. The publication consists of two parts. In the first part, the author sharply criticized the researchers of early eras who didn't pay attention to the history of workers. This topic should be given a much greater priority in new researches. During the collections, they were interested in the motives of the individuals, why they became workers. Accordingly, special attention was paid to questions related to childhood, family circumstances, the role of work in the individual way of life, and under what circumstances the person joined the workers' movement. A detailed description was expected about the changes in the situation of workers compared with the previous decades. What is unusual during ethnographic collections, a high proportion of questions deal with the effects of political changes on the individual life stories. According to Dick's publication, collectors should have asked the people about the October Revolution of 1917 in Russia, the time of the short-lived Hungarian-Soviet Republic in 1919, about Lenin, Stalin, Mátyás Rákosi. So it was not only the lifestyle and culture of the workers which was examined, but the impact of policy as well. The list of questions and the structure of the Gaudians demonstrated the intention to prove differences between the culture of the peasant society and the workers, and the attempt to describe being a worker as a higher level way of life. For the presentation of these aims, the collection in Stalin City in 1953, they collected many life stories from the workers who were building the city. Reading these stories, the characteristic of the propagated socialist man can be noticed. Optimistic stories of such workers were recorded who gained self-awareness, who had suffered in a past but in a new regime found better opportunities. These stories follow the same narrative as the official biographies rooted in personal quote. They embodied the constructed socialist movement. Which location could have been better to record the stories of new people who were reborn in socialism than the socialist ideal city, Stalin city? A few years later, after having collecting material among the workers in Stalin city, Ilona Dobos drew attention to the fact that in the new environment, important changes took place in the text repertoire of those storytellers who had moved a city from a village to. Due to the changed living conditions, way of thinking, and the different audience surrounding the storyteller, the fairy tales and belief stories were displayed by true stories, as called by her, which can be considered a manifestation of the folk prose. In 1954, the members of the Workers' Folklore Research Group focused on a single genre, the workers' song, but by the second half of the 1950s, the Workers' Folklore Research Group had lost control over the subject, and after a few years of operation, it dissolved. Naturally, the outline process was not independent of the political changes. After the death of Stalin and the political turn of July 1953, the socialist politics eased, and as a result, the research of the workers, including the research of the workers' folklore, took new directions and lost some of its popularity. In the 1960s, there were attempts to boost the research of workers' folklore and the research of workers' songs, the history of the workers' movement. The traditional Hungarian folkloristic research, which from the beginnings focused on the recording of peasant traditions, have not dealt with the workers' folklore for a long time. This viewpoint changed in 1950s when under the Soviet pressure of the folklorists started to research of the workers' folklore and urban ethnography. By the end of the decade, the work lost its initial momentum, partly because it was theoretically unfounded and because of the hardship of collections. The transformed ethnography, which followed the socialist pattern, exaggerated the importance of the research of the topic and interpreted it in the context of workers' movement and class struggle. After 1989 regime change, when the political context determining the framework of the theme disappeared, the workers' folklore was removed from the agenda of the ethnographic researches. In the last decade, the elaboration and analysis of the topic from the viewpoint of ethnography continued. And thank you for your attention.